Hello, my name is Princess Villarreal. My interviewee's name is Reyna Villarreal for the University Library Special Collections and Archives at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, hereafter abbreviated as UTRGV. This project is in partnership with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Ms. Villarreal, that this interview will be placed in the University Library Special Collections and Archives at UTRGV and shared with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. The University Library Special Collections and Archives will archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation that you are willing to share. UTRGV University Library will retain copyright or non-exclusive right to the interview and any other materials you donate to Special Collections and Archives at UTRGV. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting to make sure you agree with our interview procedures before we continue. So I'll ask you a series of 6 questions. Please say yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each question. So the first one would be, do you give University Library Special Collections and Archives at UTRGV consent to archive your interview and your materials at the UTRGV University Library?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Do you grant UTRGV University Library Special Collections and Archives right, title, and interest in copyright over the interview and any materials you provide?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, excellent. Do you agree to allow UTRGV University Library Special Collections and Archives to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant the University Library Special Collections and Archives consent to share your Zoom interview with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin for inclusion in the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History mini project, which will include posting the interview on the internet?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, sorry about that. And as you recall, we previously filled out a pre-interview form. We use information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server at the University of Texas at Austin. Before Voces sends it to UTRGV University Library Special Collections and Archives, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at UTRGV University Library. Okay, and the final 2 questions are to ask for your consent on what I just described. So, do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at UTRGV University Library Special Collections and Archives?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. On occasion, UTRGV Special Collections and Archives and Voces receive requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Thank you for your consent. Your experiences and stories mean a lot to us at UTRGV Special Collections and Archives. I look forward to what you say in the interview questions that I will now proceed to ask you. Give me 1 second while I gather those. Okay, so to start off with this interview questionnaire, I'd like to say, Reina, thank you for volunteering and accepting to participate in this interview process. Your involvement is greatly appreciated and will be acknowledged through UT Austin and UTRGV and their collaboration on this project. In this Voices of a Pandemic project, we will be navigating the personal and general experiences of the impacts of COVID-19 from your perspective. We will also be drawing from Mexican and Latino community-based experiences throughout the pandemic in the Rio Grande Valley. Since you work on a school campus as a paraprofessional for Jubilee Academies in Harlingen, and your father is especially vulnerable to COVID-19, I know that there will be much to discuss at your discretion. I know you will be an outstanding candidate for this interview because of your work, school, and home life experiences since the start of the pandemic. And lastly, your journey and close encounters with COVID-19 and how it has affected your normal routine and daily life is also essential for the questions covered in this interview. So, to start off, I'd like to ask, since you are my sister, what would you like to point out from our individually distinct experiences or impacts of COVID 19?
Well, something different that we dealt with was that I had to transition from being on campus fresh as a paraprofessional, and now we had to work from home. So that was something very different, something I had never done. So there was different transitions we had to work with, but stuff like that. I feel like that was like the one difference that we had.
Okay. So, from your personal understanding of COVID 19 and first encounters, the first question is I want to ask you, when did you first hear about COVID 19 and how did you learn about it? Was it through radio, TV, children, social media, etc.?
It was definitely through social media and also um, things that were being shared at work. We were finding out how it happened. People were coming up with their own theories, of course, but we did start hearing it like around, I would say, like the beginning of March, and how it was becoming more and more severe in China and everywhere else where it was being very affected.
Okay. And what was your first reaction to the information about COVID 19?
I was just very afraid of what would happen if I were to get it, or maybe one of my family members were to get it, or like my father that has a low immune system since he had just been battling colon cancer. So stuff like that. So I was just very afraid of the unknown.
Okay. At what point did you realize this pandemic was a serious life altering event?
I would say that it was when my boyfriend's family started testing positive for COVID, and we actually had to quarantine in their house. And me and my boyfriend had to help out, either prepare their meals, check up on them. We had the oximeter, we had the thermometer, we had everything to make sure that we knew that they were still stable and we did not have to move it to a hospital.
Okay, nice. Over the last few months, what news media, social media, or other sources do you rely on to keep you informed about coronavirus?
I would say news, but mostly it would just be updates that our school shares with us. We're very informed. We are up to date with anything that's happening with COVID. For example, we are in connection with our nurse, and our nurse does send out reminders that if you have any kind of symptoms, even if it's allergy symptoms, that we are still following the protocols, and we have to keep following them throughout the year.
Okay, excellent. Also, I would like to ask you, can you share with me what you understand about COVID 19 as an infectious disease and any of its variants? Likewise, can you share with me what you don't understand about this new coronavirus?
What I do understand is that everyone's immune system does act differently if you were to contract the coronavirus. I do know that if you are, let's say, someone that has tested positive, if you were with that person for more than 15 minutes, you were next to them, even if they did not sneeze or anything of that sort, you would still have to be considered to be quarantined, and you would have to quarantine for about 14 to 21 days, something of that sort, is what they make you quarantine for. So examples like that.
Okay. Can you tell me what you know about the various vaccines available to the public and how do you feel about these vaccines?
I do know that there are, I believe, three different vaccines. One is the Pfizer, the Johnson & Johnson, and the Moderna. And um, I recently found out that with the Moderna vaccine, a lot of people have been suffering with more of the symptoms, a lot more heaviness of the arm, a lot more that they actually have some kind of cold. So those kinds of symptoms. Because, for example, like I have the Pfizer and I've already had my second dose of the Pfizer. So I did not have any of those specific symptoms.
Okay. This next question kind of ties into what you just explained. If you have a vaccination story you would like to share with me now or perhaps later in this interview. So I guess that kind of ties into this question. If you have anything else to share with your vaccination story.
Just that when you get the first vaccine, you do get to choose what arm you get it on, and then the symptoms basically are that your arm will tend to feel heavy, very tense. Not so much pain, it's just kind of soreness, like if you went to the gym and worked out way too much, that kind of extent.
Okay. Um, do your family members hold the same beliefs as you about COVID-19, or are there some who take it more seriously or more lightly in your family?
I would say that we all are afraid of the COVID-19, so we do follow all protocols that we can that are at hand for us. And for example, my parents are kind of just scared of what would happen if they were to get the vaccine, what would happen if they were to get COVID, right? Since they are in their late 50s, this is just a concern that they have because they don't know how their bodies would react to any of those things.
Okay. So we're gonna do a little bit of a transition for your personal impacts. So for these next set of questions, I'd like to talk to you about how you've seen COVID-19 affect, again, family members, friends. Because you are from Brownsville and work in a school setting, I'd like to know the impact you have seen in Cameron County and also in the Rio Grande Valley.
There was a couple instances where we would find out that um, friends or acquaintances that we knew that their families were testing positive, or we would hear, someone losing a loved one because of COVID-19. So stories like that.
Okay, great. So for one of the first questions having to do with family, I'd like to ask you, did you do any traveling during the pandemic? And if so, what was your experience like with COVID-19's impact on travel?
Well, I actually did travel. I went to Canyon Lake, so we stayed at a lake house. So it was very more of an experience of being with family, but in the outdoors. So being kind of away from most people, not being in crowded places. So I would say that vacationing, at least for my family, we were we were still doing everything that we could to stay safe. So that meant not going to the regular places that one would go to, for example, like Six Flags, because people were still going and it was still very packed. So me and my family were definitely not ready to be in that kind of setting.
Okay, that is a great example. Also, was there ever a time you were exposed to the virus and had to relocate from your home? Where did you relocate to?
From my home, I had to go to my boyfriend's house to quarantine. I was there for about 21 days because his family started testing positive. That is a time that I had to help them out, like I said previously. So I had to relocate from my house and stay at his house so that way I wouldn't have any kind of effect on my family members, especially because they have low immune systems, and especially with my dad fighting his illness.
Okay. And how have you viewed the mask mandate and social distancing in your area, including public spaces such as shopping centers, grocery stores, and also restaurants?
I believe that we should keep the mask mandate. I think it's very important. It's something to continue to do only because, for example, I suffer from a lot of allergies, and me wearing the mask actually has helped me um, a lot throughout the year. Now that we have been through the pandemic for a whole year, so I have not gotten sick as much as I usually do with my allergies. But I do suffer from that. But other than that, I just feel that we should keep the masks, especially if we're at a grocery store, because it can get a little bit packed, and we need to. I feel like we still need to maintain that distance and the masks.
Okay. You had mentioned before that your mother lost her job due to the pandemic. Can you share how her situation has changed or been affected since then?
Yes, so my mother had to be let go from her job due to the pandemic. So it was a very different transition. So she had to stay at home, of course, and due to that, the good thing was that she was able to get help from unemployment due to everything that was happening.
Okay. And in the pre interview, you mentioned that your father is the most vulnerable to COVID-19 because he battles colon cancer. How has this caused a significant difference in your daily home and your daily work life?
I do have to take extra precautions. Always, as soon as I touch something, a surface of any sort, I do sanitize or clean my hands. I'm very aware of wearing my mask, making sure that it's secured, that it's actually protecting me, and it's not just a thin layer. Due to that, I do live with my dad, so I wouldn't want to pass anything down to him, of course, and especially because of his immune system.
Okay. Also, has anyone in your household contracted COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic in early 2020?
No, they haven't.
Okay. And how has returning to school campus for work changed since before the effects of the pandemic?
The situation at work, it was just a very different transition from trying to teach kids, for example, phonemic awareness at home, which is saying letters and showing them sight words and all that stuff. So it's transitioned a little bit different now that I'm on campus. I'm able to do these activities with the students, at least the ones that are in my class, and also the distance learners. Of course, I do log in, but it was something very different that we all experienced together.
Okay. Also, prior to this interview, you discussed how your boyfriend's entire family or entire household contracted COVID-19 at one point. Can you share a little bit of what that was like for you and the assistance that you provided?
Yes, so it was a very stressful time, just because we were afraid of getting it ourselves. Because if we then got it ourselves and we tested positive, me and my boyfriend, then we weren't going to be able to take care of everyone else. The good thing was that everybody had their own separate room, so everybody was quarantined in their specific room. And what we would do is, if they needed anything, we would just contact them. Sorry. Through their phones, text messages, and let them know, like, how are you feeling? Do we need to take your temperature? Like, um, do they need to eat anything or anything of that sort? And we would just leave it at their door.
All right. So, transitioning into the remote teaching and learning, this next set of questions focuses on your stories and experiences as an educator and essential worker in the time of COVID-19. So, one of the questions I'd like to ask is, how long have you been employed with Jubilee Academies as a paraprofessional co-teacher?
I have been a paraprofessional now for a year and 2 months.
Okay. What were some of the major struggles you faced while adjusting to remote work, so from working from home?
Something different was for sure that I had to um, be able to help my teacher still from home, even though I was at my home and she was at her home. We were all connected virtually. So I would be in charge of the meetings. So it would depend on who had ownership of the meeting. That's how it would work to where I could help her out. I could take attendance that way for her, and I could also see what student is unmuting themselves, and I had the power on my side to mute the students if they were disrupting class.
All right. And what do you teach in your position and what grade levels? And how would you describe your role in the classroom?
So my role in the classroom, I do teach second and third grade. I have a teacher who I work with, and we focus on ELAR and social studies. And so I basically would help her out if any of the students need help while she is helping another. I would help out whoever needed more assistance. And also, I work with the tier three second graders who did suffer a lot from the transition of their first grade year to now being in second grade.
Okay. Now that you are no longer teaching remotely, how have you adjusted to being back on campus with so many young children and young students?
I did miss my students a lot. That is one thing for sure. But it was a little bit scary in the beginning just because I did not know where my students might have been, if they had traveled, if they had not traveled. Just those concerns of knowing if they were following all the protocols just the way that I was. But it was great to have them back on campus because I feel like they learn a lot better that way.
All right. How have you seen students cope with the pandemic and how are they practicing the COVID-19 guidelines and restrictions in the classroom setting?
So in the classroom, we have the desks all 6 feet apart, and everybody has to wear their mask. They're only allowed to take off their mask if they're drinking water at their desk or if they're having breakfast, because we do have breakfast inside of the classrooms. But for lunch, they do go to the cafeteria, and there are dots located on the floor all the way and arrows showing them what direction they should be walking to the cafeteria. And as well, they keep their masks on. And once they are seated in the cafeteria, they are 6 feet apart, one table, and it's two students, and then they are able to take off their mask there.
Okay. And now that you are back on campus, how many students are you teaching and how many did you have in the classroom prior to the pandemic?
Before the pandemic, I had about 20 to 24 students in my second grade class and as well as my in my third grade class. And now due to the pandemic, there are some distance learners still. So right now it's about half and half. So about 12 students are at home as distance learners and 12 students are in our actual classrooms for second and third grade.
Okay. And so for work-related challenges as a paraprofessional at Jubilee Academies in Harlingen, I'd like to ask you, are you concerned about the effectiveness of remote and online learning for educating your students and how so?
My only concern would be the distractions that may be around at home. Let's say if they have a pet, they might be distracted with the pet, or maybe if they have toys around them in their room, they do sometimes grab them and put them in the camera view. So sometimes that can be distracting or disruptive to our lessons. So that's the only thing that I would stress to parents to make sure that they are monitoring their students, I mean their children when they are in a class session.
Okay. And have you had to take on any extra work duties because of COVID-19?
I am right now. I am tutoring Tuesdays and Thursdays for my second graders. I will be working with Tier 3, which is my Group A, the lower students that still need a lot catching up to get them on track for second grade.
Okay, great. And also, also, what kind of policies has Jubilee Academies enacted to get ahead of the disease?
So a lot of cleanliness takes part in this. They do clean the school every single day when we're about to leave. They have this big vacuum machine that goes throughout the school. They disinfect. They have very powerful specific disinfectants that they spray. And we do have a procedure where we have to clean the Chromebooks and connect them to charge every single day before we leave work. And so we sanitize our desks, we sanitize our Chromebooks, which is our computers that they use, and things like that.
Okay. And also, I'd like to ask, do you know of any employee or support staff member who has received a pay cut, lost work, or has been furloughed?
I do know that two of our staff members were terminated because they were sharing food, which is one of our protocols that we strictly follow.
I see. Okay. So, also, have there been any students or teachers since the return to campus that have contracted COVID-19 that you have learned of?
We did have our very first case. A student of mine did contract COVID, and the way that happened was that her mother, when she went to work, since we have to take our temperatures right before we enter our jobs, she noticed that she had a fever, even though she didn't have any symptoms. So she then took out the student and tested her, and she came back positive.
Okay. Is it hard to get students to maintain their distance from each other and follow the proper COVID-19 restrictions?
Sometimes it can be a little difficult. Sometimes they forget, they do want to play with their classmates or, show them something, and they just forget that they can't even tap their fellow classmates' shoulder or anything like that, that we have to keep our hands to ourselves. We have to always keep our masks on. So I think it's not something they do on purpose, but they do sometimes forget that we're still in this situation.
Okay. And so, transitioning into some of our final questions to conclude our interview, I'd like to ask, are you satisfied with the local response to COVID-19 in the city of Brownsville and in Cameron County?
I believe that we have been following everything very well, with everything with the COVID protocols. One thing I would just mention or say is that I have noticed that at grocery stores people do tend to forget that we still need to keep our distance. Um, so that's all I would have to add to that.
Okay. And also, are you satisfied with the state response to COVID-19 led by Texas, led by the state?
The only thing I would say is that um, I think that they should have kept the mask mandate a little bit longer, just because there was so many deaths, so many people had it. So I think that maybe stretching it out just a little bit more would keep us more on the safe side.
Okay. And are you satisfied with the current national response to COVID-19 led by President Biden and his administration?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. And if you had the power to respond to COVID-19 with policies, laws, or workplace decisions, what would you do differently, if anything?
I think that, like I mentioned before, stretching out the mask mandate and also our distances and the capacity of establishments and stuff like that, since now some of them are at 100%, I feel like we should have continued with maybe 50%.
Okay, great. And for the last question, I would like to ask you, are there any other stories or experiences that you would like to share with me that I have not asked about?
Not at this time.
Okay, so Reina, I would like to thank you again for sharing your personal experience, thoughts, and opinions with me. To let you know, this interview is going to be available for future generations to see and discover how people like yourself have lived throughout the pandemic, through a pandemic. And I appreciate how much you have shared with us and the in school experiences, conditions that you are now working with. Again, thank you so much for participating and being a voice of the pandemic. I really, really appreciate your help, Reina. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Likewise.